Okay, 9th annual South Carolina Gun Law Seminar. Thank you guys again. The ones that keep coming back, we try to just keep making it better, and I really appreciate you guys keep coming back because obviously this year we've got Masad Ayub. Never even thought we could get a guy like that here. Hallbrook's back. Never thought we could get those kind of guys. All of our South Carolina guys. So again, thank you. You got your booklet here, the materials. We're trying to make them a little smaller. You'll probably get some references to online stuff so you don't have too much paperwork. The Boodle bag is thanks from my mom, Bernice, and it should have all little extra goodies in there. Lunch will be here again at noon. And my biggest request is that, catch these guys, the speakers or whatever, talk, and they're going to be here most of the day if you want to talk with them, but if we can just keep them away from these back areas here because that sound filters in. So there's a whole area on the other side of the building. You can catch them or out in the lobby out here. But if you could just keep the conversations while the seminar is going on, keep them further away from this office here, or this room here. The book, you can't judge a book by its cover, but this, I found a company called Fiverr. I don't know if you ever used Fiverr, but this is the first year I actually paid for a graphic artist to do the cover, and I think it looks great. And it was like basically $50 on Fiverr to get somebody to design this thing. So if you have any need for almost any service at all, it's Fiverr, and I mean they can write papers for you. They can do stuff like this. I think it's just people all around the world that will do stuff at a really good price. So anyway, Fiverr did it for $50. The new stuff in there is the governor signed a law that says if you file bankruptcy, you're allowed to keep up to 3 guns. So it's an exemption in basically to creditors for up to 3 guns or a certain value of guns. Also, I beefed up the self-defense part because we just got done with a road rage shooting case and finally pled out to it and think we got a pretty good result. But I used the lessons from that and things to really talk about the self-defense part of this. Anyway, I don't want to hold you up too much more, so I'm going to turn it over to Roy for his legislative update.
Okay. Thank you, Steve.
Mm-hmm.
Good. I'm stuck with my wife's reading glasses, so these aren't mine, but I may have to use them. Okay, I'm going to skip the bankruptcy exemption update because Steve just mentioned that. There's really not a lot to it. It's 3 guns. It was NRA sponsored, not sponsored, but supported legislation, and the only other limit is there's a $3,000 maximum. So 3 guns up to $3,000. I don't know if I did that or.
That's your house volume.
Okay.
Go ahead. Keep
Okay. There's a lot of legislation from last session that I could touch on, but we don't have a lot of time, so I'm just going to hit highlights of things I think would be interesting to you. And I'll give you my email address at the end, and if you want some of the items, I have some AG opinions and things like that, I'd be glad for you to have them. Bump stocks have been in the news since the Las Vegas shooting, and we now have a bill in South Carolina. Personally, I don't think it's necessarily going to get a lot of traction, but it's worth mentioning because there's so much interest right now in that subject. Frankly, I have never used a bump stock. I have one friend who's a competition shooter, and he said that he had used one before. It was kind of fun for a frolic, but it was terribly inaccurate, and that's from a person that is a skilled shooter. And the problem is that it, by definition, is not well seated on the shoulder, so it's hard to get accuracy. Although from the bright point of aim, and with density of people, obviously from Las Vegas, if that is true that he used bump stocks, apparently, it's clear that it still can be dangerous. This bill would basically make it unlawful to possess a bump stock or a so-called trigger crank. It would be a felony with a 5-year minimum imprisonment. This issue's been in the news. You can see, and this is not a real good picture, but the news depicts these. I think there's a company called Slidefire that makes bump stocks. Or I think there's another one, but I'm not sure of them at the moment who it is. But you see in the media, you see a grenade launcher here and a suppressor. It's a very angry-looking rifle. The bump stock feature is actually in the back. And again, I've not used one before, but I've seen several videos on them. I wanted to be prepared to talk to you about them. The issue is whether or not they convert a semi-automatic gun into what would be actually an automatic gun. And then there's the issue, as to what that really is. And the media doesn't do a good job with that, and a lot of people don't understand that. I have a video that I think is interesting. This is Mayor Bloomberg and his thoughts on automatic weapons. Then I have a demonstration here. Let's see if I can get this to play on what semi-automatic actually is versus the bump fire. Let's see if we can get this to play. Okay. Seem to be having a little trouble with that part. But nonetheless, let me just go back to pointing out that when it comes to the bump stock, it really is not a rate of fire that's near what you'd have through a fully automatic weapon. It's faster. I think the statistics I saw on it is maybe 3 times faster than if you just do single, each time you pull the trigger, you get a discharge, but nowhere near fully automatic, which would be somewhere around 7 rounds. It'd be 7 rounds per second with bump fire. I think maybe 15 plus for fully automatic. So no doubt it speeds things up, but actually in terms of whether it makes the gun fully automatic, there's no question that it doesn't. Okay. Now, the City of Columbia, following on the lines of many mayors and state and cities that I say turn to these issues as maybe to some extent you say they politicize them, but exploit them. But the idea is that they may take action where they feel that the federal government hasn't or the state hasn't. And the City of Columbia has done that with an ordinance which basically preempts the use, or rather prohibits the use of any bump stock. And they view this as an attachment, not a component of a firearm. And that's how they justify it. Because under the state code, local ordinances are preempted as it comes to regulation of firearms or the components. So the bump stock ordinance was challenged in December by an attorney in the Columbia area who filed suit. And the theory of the suit is that just as the City of Columbia tried to prohibit CWP holders from being within a certain distance of the Capitol grounds several years ago, and that ordinance was found to be preempted by Attorney General's opinion. And also, there was a state case, Hakeem was the name of the case, filed. That ended up with an order that basically went along the lines of AG's opinion that the ordinance was not permitted, it's unconstitutional, as well as being prohibited by state statute under the home rule aspect of the code. So this most recent suit alleges that not only is the Columbia ordinance preempted, but also there's a violation of the prior court order that said that the city could not regulate such matters based on the state constitution and based on the preemption statute. So that case is still pending. The city officials' point of view, according to Mayor Benjamin, is that they're not regulating components of a firearm, they're regulating attachments to a firearm. So that's the distinction that they're making. And the lawsuit makes fun of that as a distinction without a difference. And to my mind, it probably is. But anyway, that suit has been filed, and it raises the issue of the many different ordinances that we have in our state, which and actually signage is a great example too as well, of local regulation that is in violation of our state code and actually probably the Constitution, this home rule concept. A city cannot legislate on a criminal matter to make it more, to add any penalty beyond what the state has added, nor can they, exempt something that the state prohibits. So when you see these local ordinances that purport to regulate the carry of firearms, and this, like whether it's in a park area, and there's been an AG's opinion on that, involved the City of Travelers Rest and Trailblazer Park, or in the case of Columbia, they're most likely preempted. Most recently, we've had a Attorney General's opinion on a Greenville ordinance. This came out maybe about the first week of January. And see, Greenville has an ordinance that prohibits the possession of a loaded rifle or shotgun on public property. Well, there really is no state prohibition on that. Now, there are places that you can't obviously carry firearms, but the way that Greenville interprets this, and this is clear from I'm aware of a demonstration sometime, let's say within the last year or so, where a gentleman had a musket. It wasn't loaded, but the city police demanded that he take it back to his car and basically break it down and not have it, and it's a symbol state as a part of the demonstration. Well, this ordinance, when you look at it, is really no different than the Columbia ordinance back when the AG said that you can't regulate CWP carry beyond what the state has regulated. And in fact, this AG's opinion, which was again issued just some weeks back, says the same thing. The Greenville ordinance would probably be unconstitutional and in violation of the state preemption provisions. Now, until an ordinance is determined to be invalid by court, it's presumed valid. So the AG's opinion does caveat that. But nonetheless, I think this would be very persuasive authority if there were a suit seeking to declare this ordinance invalid based on the AG's opinion that addresses this very ordinance. And I suppose it's possible that somebody brought a case as a 1983 action. There might be issues as to damages for violation of a constitutional right. I'm no expert in that area of the law, but I think that's possibly a risk that municipalities run when they enact these ordinances for when there's such clear authority from the courts and the AG's office that these are not permitted. So the other issues from talking to some friends in the General Assembly that might actually be of some interest. Constitutional carry is, I understand it's out of subcommittee at the Senate. The bill is Senate 449, and this bill would allow citizens of South Carolina to carry a firearm unless prohibited, and there are certain areas, as you know, that are prohibited. I mean, there's the same list as usual, the courthouses and such. But this would obviate the need for permit, be like permitless carry. There are a number of states in the country that have that, and there are as many as, I'm going to say 40 plus that have open carry, which this bill would permit. But whether or not this bill actually would be enacted, according to the people I've talked to, is going to depend on that complicated process in the General Assembly where a bill is voted out of committee, which I'm told by my sources it probably will be, but then it's subject to an objection being lodged, and then there has to be some special order, and it gets complicated. So it's by no means certain that this bill will be enacted into law, but it's closer probably than we have been in the state before to having something like that made into law. It's opposed by the usual groups, but more importantly, I think just in terms of political issues, the City of Charleston Police Department has come out in opposition to it. The Sheriff's Association, I'm not aware that they've made their position known yet, but I would predict that they would be opposed to it, just based on previous history. And I would expect the State Law Enforcement Association to follow suit. Now, those organizations don't speak for all law enforcement. Clearly, I'm aware, and I'm sure you are, that there are many sheriffs and even those within cities, might be policemen, that don't agree with that. But when it comes to the opinions that are put on the record, whatever the politics are of the mayor, probably the police chief either is going to have to abide by that whether he agrees or not, or has been hired because he does agree with it. The city of Greenville, our police chief has advocated for gun registration in South Carolina, which, I think you would agree is probably not in touch with what most South Carolinians would want to see. But, when you're a city police chief, you can have those opinions because you're not an elected official. And sheriff's a different issue, but as a general rule, the Sheriff's Association has been pretty much opposed to any change that would liberalize the carry or possession of firearms. On reciprocity, that's another area where I think that, in fact, maybe the most likely area that we could see some changes this year based on what my sources have told me. And what I do is, before I do this each year, and even before I do each one of these, I call the people in the General Assembly that will take the time to talk to me about what's pending and give me some idea of what they think could actually make it to the light of day out of subcommittees, might actually get to a vote, and then it's anybody's guess, particularly based on our special objection process, whether it actually be enacted into law. But this is one, I'm told, this area of reciprocity where we might actually see something happen this year. So if I'm going to rank them, I'm going to say on reciprocity, we're probably going to see the best odds of something happening are here. Constitutional carry or permitless carry, decent, but I think there's, maybe problems there. And then things like bump stock restrictions and that, I personally don't think that's going to be enacted, but I think there's going to be a lot of talk, about that, and it'll probably be in the news. Last year we did get Georgia reciprocity, so I should start this topic by mentioning that. This was very controversial at the time. As you probably know, particularly those that pass through that area around the Savannah River, Aiken area and all that, you had a situation where Georgia permit holders, once they crossed the line, they couldn't carry in South Carolina because SLED's view was they didn't have adequate training under their systems. I actually talked to the Sheriff's Association executive director before that bill was passed, and I asked him what their objections were to it, and his feeling was that they don't vet their folks as well in Georgia, and that they don't, whatever training we have here, which any of you that are CWP holders, that's it's pretty minimal, I'd have to say, what we have here. It has been stricter in the past, but it's pretty minimal. I think if you can load a firearm and basically point it down range, I think you stand a very good chance of getting your permit. Of course, your record has to be clear, but I don't think that that was the problem here as much. But it was raised because they have some probate court procedure down there. Nonetheless, just as in the case where in the past, when the more strict training was relaxed and there was all these forecasts of problems that would occur, nothing happened. In fact, we got more reciprocity with other states. Georgia reciprocity enacted, and correct me if anyone's heard differently, I've heard nothing about the Georgia CWP holders coming to South Carolina and being any public nuisance or threat to public safety. So once again, liberalizing this area, in this area of law, of recognizing other permit holders, really hasn't created any problems. And it's surprising how often you hear these objections based on safety concerns, then the issue is put to a test where the law is enacted, and you hear nothing. And so I think Georgians have proved themselves to be responsible, and we've had no problems with them. The reciprocity that we have currently, depends. It's complicated. We've got, like some states, it's enhanced only. Mississippi, a state I'm very familiar with, they have a enhanced program where if you have the enhanced training, you can actually carry to college ball game or on campus. If you have their enhanced certificate, you can carry in numerous places that we wouldn't permit you to carry in South Carolina. Obviously, when they come here, they have to follow our laws, but nonetheless, the way that we recognize other states' permits makes it complicated for us when we travel in many cases, because we have sort of a patchwork of what we will agree to allow. The bill 3240, which is the one that I'm telling you I think has a pretty good chance of making it into the code, is called the National Concealed Weapons Permit Reciprocity Act. And obviously, we're talking state level here. I'm aware that at the federal level there's an initiative, but it hasn't really seen much support by Mitch McConnell, and I'm not aware of any change in that area, so we'll just stick to talking about our state. If this were enacted, then any state that recognized our permits, basically we would recognize theirs. And the only part of this that is going to cause some trouble if it is enacted, this 21-year-old limit, is going to conflict with a number of states. For example, Mississippi, I think, would be one. And also I'm informed that in South Carolina this is probably an unconstitutional limitation. There has been a Supreme Court case on limitation of the rights of those 18 years of older, and this 21 versus 18 issue, and I can't give you the case name, but I don't think that's, if challenged, I don't think that's a valid limitation based on the information that I have. There are many carryovers from the last term on transfer and carry prohibitions. There's still efforts to ban assault weapons. We have, if you're in the terror watch list, then you can't, not that we'd necessarily know who that would be, but all this legislation is still down there. It's all viable because, we have a 2-term session, so anything on last year's term that's introduced still could possibly become law. But these various bills, like the Universal Background Check Bill, all these background check delays, a lot of them after the Charleston shooting at the church there where 9 people were killed. Most of these, none of these, I think, actually have any chance of passing. Some of them really don't even make sense based on what they were intended to do. In the Dylan Roof case, for example, his acquisition of firearm wouldn't be affected by a 28-day background check, but these ideas, they hit at an emotional level, particularly after a tragedy, and so you start to see a lot of different ideas. Maybe this would help, maybe that, but in fact, regardless, I don't think any of these, based on my sources, are going to have much chance of seeing the light of day. Campus carry, there is a bill we have down there on campus carry. I don't see that happening in South Carolina. The Jacob Hall incident, you may be aware, that was up in Townsville, near where I'm from in Greenville. I believe a 7-year-old boy was killed when a young man came to school grounds and began shooting. He was subdued by a firefighter, as it turns out, off duty, who happened to be on campus. And that led to some thoughts about, well, maybe it would be a good idea if we allowed for school employees to carry, and you'll see the idea is that we already have state personnel on site at these institutions. If we had like teachers, administrators, if we had some of them that were trained, that might be of some help in adding protection, particularly where we don't have the, what do we call them, resource officers in the schools. There are some schools that don't have a resource officer. I know, talking to a local fire chief, a special purpose district I'm familiar with, his daughter's in a school where the resource officer circulates among 3 schools. So when the car's in the parking lot, you know he's there, and when it's not, he's not. So you have to go through more security to get in the state house or courthouse than you have to get to in the schoolhouse. And we have these problems, so we got to ask ourselves, before we go. I mean, personally, I think the wisdom of some of these bills is, rather than trying to disarm every person out there with evil intent, what about hardening the target where we think we might have some vulnerability? Clearly, we do that at the courthouse. And it's not a bad thing. I was at a hearing years ago between 2 people that bitterly opposed to one another, and this was years ago, and there was no metal detector or anything like that, and we're walking the courtroom, and I knew that they're back there behind us, and it's a little uncomfortable, because sometimes when emotions run high, that's when you start to worry that you may actually be at some risk. So I think it's a good thing, but our schools, I don't really think we've done enough in South Carolina to recognize that we need to have good protections there, whether it's through these kinds of bills or whether it's through just having more law enforcement on site, which I think is a valid option. But obviously we all want something to be done to keep these children safe. College campus carry is another kettle of fish. Quite a few states have it. Like Texas has it most recently. There's been a lot of controversy about it, a lot of protest, a lot of concern. But as of yet, no stories out of Texas about any of the problems that were predicted, and that's largely been true as far as I know of the other states that permit it. So is it a real problem or just a perceived problem? That's something for us to sort out. But more practically, I don't think that bill is going to go anywhere this year in South Carolina. So that's more or less an overview of where we are. Just to sum up, we've got, I'll give you an overview of some obstacles that we have. The budget that has to be resolved this year, which I'm told is going to take a lot of time. We have a shortened legislative term, which is going to take a lot away from those last weeks when actually a lot of things got done. And we also have this issue with the utilities. And so those things taken together are going to make it difficult to get here. I mean, the number of bills alone on the utilities issues, I'm told, is just enormous. So there's a lot of push for discussion of other things besides these issues. Well, and while they might be important or interesting to us, it just may not be that there's only time to deal with them there. But of the bills that are entertained, it looks like the reciprocity expansion has the best chance. Again, that bill's been reported out of subcommittee, is in the Judiciary Committee. That's Senate Bill 449. The reciprocity bill, which expand reciprocity, second best bet. After that, don't expect to see a whole lot enacted this session. Okay, now, if you would like to have copies of those AG's opinions, like I do have the most recent AG's opinion that considers that Greenville ordinance, that's very fresh off the press. If you'd like to get a copy of that, I can do that. Just let me know afterwards, and I'll be glad to send it to you by email. And I actually, for that matter, I've got some information on that bump stock litigation. I've got the suit papers. If you'd like to see the suit, it's filed by an attorney by the name of Paul Schnee. He was the lawyer that filed it. I've got the complaint and civil cover sheet and all that stuff on that. That was filed just last month, challenging that City of Columbia ordinance. So I can get any of that for you if you'd like to see, if you have an interest. And that's going to pretty much sum up my part. Steve, did you want to?
Yeah, we'll give a little more time for.
Give some more time to.
The bump stocks if you want.
No, that's.
What were you asking? I'm sorry.
No, I just said, are you ready for the next speaker?
Yeah, yes, we are. Yeah.
Yeah, just.
Sorry for the informality here, but we're going to give more. We'll give more time to the bump stocks and all the federal cases.
Well, we have ATF here.
Yes,
but
exactly.
Not technically, but sort of.
When they're and we have Miller here.
Yeah, we don't.
Okay, yeah, let's go ahead and. You guys want to come up, Miller and Hendricks? Thank you, Roy.
All right, thank you.
Let me get that. Take. Now I'm guessing Miller's I'll give you a microphone. Okay. Yeah. Mark Kelly, right? If anybody needs a quick coffee break or anything, we'll have a few minutes here if you want. All right. You should be good with that, yeah.
See you too.
I'm gonna let you introduce.
I tell you what.
Yeah.
You just text me. Hook me in here together. He'll talk out. He'll go hear me.
This is the main house one, and then we'll
Okay,
give
so
you
I gotta put on two?
both. Yeah.
Dude, I feel like I'm on CNN now. Oh,
You like the handheld? You guys like?
I'm probably just going to,
Or you could just.
I'm just going to sit to the side with the hand mic.
Okay.
oh no way, you're going to be up front. You're not getting away with that.
I'm assuming you have a lot to say.
I don't.
I do not want to.
You're the expert.